A military KC-135 is on a dangerous refueling assignment over a war zone in the Middle East.
05's level.
They told us that 15% of us could possibly get shot down.
What the?
When suddenly, the mission goes wrong.
No good, we're losing her.
We were going 110 degrees of bank in both directions.
What the heck is happening?
It's beyond the capability of the airplane to do that.
Go get the parachutes and helmets. Roger.
It became apparent pretty quickly that we weren't going to be able to complete our mission.
The question is why?
Mayday, 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 this is Whale 05.
Investigators must quickly determine if it was a mechanical failure
So this control cable snapped.
or enemy fire.
Was this intentional? It's very critical to the entire operation to really figure out what happened.
It's late afternoon at King Abdulaziz Airport in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Dozens of U.S. Air Force KC-135 aircraft prepare for late-night missions during the Gulf War. Today, more than 90 large tanker jets are preparing to refuel combat missions over Iraq and Kuwait.
90 knots, I'll hand it over to you.
Roger.
Major Kevin Sweeney and the crew of U.S. Air Force Flight Whale 05 review the final details of their mission.
Guard switches.
He's the commander.
Flight start.
Sweeney has over 20 years of Air Force flying experience. It's his job to know the mission and his plane.
But the aircraft commander is just like the captain. You haven't to make any tough decisions. It's your responsibility, although it's very important to take input from the rest of your crew members and listen to them.
Set takeoff thrust at 1.82 EPR.
EPR set for takeoff. "90 knots. My airplane."
Jay Solanders is Sweeney's trusted co-pilot.
Your airplane.
The aircraft commander is always responsible for the airplane, so you can't trade that. But specific duties we would trade back and forth.
At 5:25 p.m., Whale 05 lifts off from Jeddah. Coalition forces are 2 weeks into Operation Desert Storm, one of the largest bombing campaigns in aviation history. Hundreds of daily bombing runs drive Saddam Hussein's invading Iraqi army out of Kuwait.
The size of the American air power contribution, if you will, in Desert Storm just can't be overstated. It was quite astounding.
Sweeney and his crew are flying a Boeing KC-135 Stratotanker. The aircraft is similar to Boeing's commercial 707, but is specially designed for mid-air refueling.
It really began the jet era, and it is a great airplane. It's true, it's fast, it's strong. It's one of Boeing's best products, and once you become accustomed to a few of its idiosyncrasies, sweet airplane to fly. We'll take you a long way and bring you home.
Steve, are you going to transfer from the center tank?
Affirmative. 2 units of trim should keep us within the limits.
Senior Master Sergeant Steve Stuckey is the boom operator. He's critical to the refueling operation. During refueling, he guides the fuel boom to the receiving plane.
Once he is within 3 to 5 feet of the boom from the receptacle,
Got him at 1.0.
I'll guide that boom into the receptacle. Then we can transfer fuel from the boom into his airplane.
The amount of fuel that you can carry, whether in a bomber or a fighter, becomes critical in terms of being able to get to the place that you need to go and bring them back. There simply isn't any other substitute for air refueling.
Tonight's mission takes them along a tanker corridor, an aerial highway for tanker crews heading north from Jeddah. When they reach waypoint Rita, they'll turn east before making their final turn to the rendezvous point less than 180 miles from combat zones near the Kuwaiti border.
Transition altitude, set altimeter 2992.
Navigator Greg Mermis is in charge of keeping the mission safely on course.
We were primarily responsible for running the rendezvous, joining up with the other aircraft to complete the refueling.
I knew that Greg was going to do everything to put us in the right position at the right time.
Tonight, they'll be refueling an AWACS plane, a radar surveillance and control unit, a prime target for enemy fire.
I don't think any of us had any idea what to really expect. You know, they were estimating that 10% of the air refueling fleet was going to probably being shot down. So it was a little bit nerve-wracking.
The crew faces Iraqi surface-to-air missiles and more than 700 enemy aircraft, including the dreaded Russian MiG-25.
We had F-15s up there, F-16s, and their primary mission was air-to-air, looking for enemy airplanes to come and possibly try to attack an American airplane.
To be flying any sort of an airplane in a war zone is surreal. I don't care how much you prepared for it. The ability to think in a volatile environment and to stay very calm is absolutely a requirement of the job.
05's level.
Whale 05 reaches cruising altitude. As they get closer to enemy territory, the pilots reduce radio contact to avoid detection. The only other plane in sight is another American KC-135 flying ahead in the same flight corridor.
Heading 088.
Altitude hold. On. Altitude hold check.
The crew will keep this course for 45 minutes until they rendezvous with the AWACS plane.
That was our time to maybe relax a little bit. Nothing really kind of happening except cruising at that point. So I always, used to take the opportunity to go ahead and make my dinner.
Stuckey reviews his mission brief, which involves delivering 125,000 pounds of fuel.
There's times when desert air is very stable and it's like you're flying on glass. But while I'm working on the paperwork, I felt a little bounce.
Solanders feels an abnormal movement in the yoke.
The autopilot was on, but I saw the yoke deflect about 30, 35 degrees to the left, and it was shaking just a little bit, which is very odd. And just about the time I put my hands on the yoke, thinking I was going to punch the autopilot off, it came back to neutral. Well, it's some anomaly.
Moments later, things go very wrong.
I got it.
It takes just a second for the plane to roll 110 degrees to the left.
What the heck is happening?
The first thing to think about is fly the jet. And the second thing is, what the devil just happened?
We really had no idea what was going on to the aircraft.
I thought perhaps a missile had hit us.
Did we get hit?
Because it was violent.
I can't tell.
I'd been flying for probably 10 years at that point and been on a lot of missions, but never experienced anything like that.
The crew can't tell if there's some kind of malfunction or if they're under attack.
We're gonna lose her. We gotta get her level.
Just as it seems the plane is in an unrecoverable left bank, it snaps hard to the right.
The airplane literally flipped. This is clearly unusual. It's beyond the capability of the airplane to do that.
I mean, we're just totally out of control. We were going 110 degrees of bank in both directions.
In the galley, Stuckey is in trouble.
I didn't know what was going on. It seemed like I would get to my feet and then I'd fall down again. It wasn't good.
Now there's too much stress.
The airplane is very resilient, but it isn't resilient enough to overcome the stresses that would be put on it if you rolled it in the wrong direction and tried to get out of a high-speed dive.
If the aircraft banks much further, it will be impossible to recover.
But if we didn't get this under control and out of these wild gyrations very quickly, this airplane was going to come apart. And then we're just history.
The pilots of Whale 05 are facing a crisis over the Saudi Arabian desert. The plane is rolling violently.
It's no good. It's no good. We're losing her.
I have got to focus on what I'm doing, and I don't have any time for any extraneous thinking.
Just when all seems lost, Major Sweeney plays a hunch.
Speed brake.
Speed brakes are devices on airplane wings designed to increase drag during descent and landing. Sweeney deploys the speed brakes on both wings, hoping it will level the airplane.
What happens is when the speed brakes come out, it gives you more roll capability that is manually at your command and less capability for the airplane to go off and do something on its own aerodynamically.
It's a procedure Sweeney remembers from his training. It works.
I remember leveling out, just amazed that the airplane was still flying. And, you know, everybody's still there.
Incredibly, the pilots have managed to level the plane. But they're not out of trouble yet.
All right, I have lateral control, but we're losing altitude.
We got fire lights on engines 1 and 2.
The pilots discover a problem with the two left engines.
Jay and I looked at the engine instruments, and they're all over the place.
These engine instruments make no sense.
Both engines on the left wing have fire lights on, and why that would happen to both of them at the same time is also going through your head.
The plane is fully loaded with fuel.
Steve, how bad are the fires on engines 1 and 2? Checking.
If there's a fire in the engines, it could lead to disaster.
Oh my God.
The only thing I could see was torn sheet metal on the wing where the engines were and fuel being vented over the top of the wing.
They're not on fire.
They're gone. No fire?
Affirmative.
No fire. The engines are gone. Roger.
There was a moment where that sentence didn't make a lot of sense to us. Wait a minute, they're gone. It takes just a moment for your mind to catch up to that, because now you've got really important pieces of the airplane not there.
Even with no fire, the crew faces another urgent problem.
We really got to get some fuel off here. Let's start dumping. Jay, you fly. Don't fight it.
I have the aircraft.
The two remaining engines can't provide enough power to keep the heavy aircraft airborne.
Well, we had no time to relax, but I knew that we were in serious trouble, and we had to come up with a lot of different procedures to keep us in the air.
Close, open, dump, pump. Close, open.
The fuel dump checklist is one of many emergency procedures embedded in Sweeney's brain. He conducts it from memory. Sweeney starts shedding fuel.
We had to get lighter so this baby'd start to fly. Jay and I could kind of start to feel at 16,000 feet like she could start flying again.
Okay, I got the airplane.
Holding steady at 16,000.
By dumping 50 tons of fuel, Sweeney has succeeded in stopping their descent.
Good. Good. Halting fuel dump.
Even though the plane is maintaining its altitude, there's no guarantee it can make a safe landing.
Go get the parachutes and helmets. If anything else goes wrong, we'll need to bail.
Roger.
Ditching over the desert at night is a terrifying option. But there may be no choice.
No aircrew wants to bail out, but I've got to get my crew back safely. That's my job, is to get my aircrew back safely.
The final methodology is to get everybody to jump out, but you may lose a crew member or two just in that process. So this is not a decision to be taken lightly.
Greg, you get on the radio with AWACS. Call in the Mayday.
Roger.
Looking for help, the crew contacts their rendezvous aircraft to advise them of the situation.
It became apparent pretty quickly that we weren't going to be able to complete our mission.
Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Whale 05. We've had an in-flight upset and number 1 and 2 engines have departed the aircraft. I say again, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday.
There's no response.
It's no good. I think our high-frequency radio is down.
It should have worked, but it didn't. We couldn't reach anybody.
Alone, with no radio contact, the crew will have to find their own way back to Jeddah.
We like our radios, especially when something goes wrong, but they're not going to provide necessarily a hook to come out of the sky and save you. You've got to do that for yourself, including getting back to an airfield.
Greg, are your nav instruments working?
Yes, INS is functional. Radar is still up.
Well, give me a heading back to Jeddah.
240, 55 minutes. That's a long time to fly.
Copy. Jay, take us to 240.
The crew relies on the navigator's skills to find a safe route back.
It was just under an hour to get back to Jeddah. It just seemed like an awfully long time to be in an airplane that you were very unsure of.
Your airplane. My airplane.
With great effort, Sweeney and Salanders wrestle to keep the plane on course to Jeddah. Without the weight and drag of the left engines, the plane wants to bank right.
The ailerons and elevators in a KC-135 are not hydraulic. And so I have to fight her back to keep those wings level.
But even if they make it back, there's no guarantee they can land the plane.
We have to do a controllability check.
The crew must test their flaps and ailerons.
Going back to idle.
The flight controls used to stabilize the plane on landing.
A big airplane inherently has an ability to be landed if you can keep it under control. So the question is, are we safe to go ahead and try to land this airplane with what we've got?
If we're going to do a controllability check and Jay and I determine that she's not flyable, we're going to have to bail out.
All right, Jay, I want you to slowly bring them down.
Roger that.
Flying a severely damaged plane near enemy territory, the crew of Whale 05 carefully check that the control surfaces on their plane are safe for landing.
There's a moment right before you begin the check that you don't obviously know exactly what's going to happen.
If the flaps are damaged,
Flaps 10.
it could cause an imbalance and make the plane impossible to control.
We didn't know if the flaps would come down symmetrically. We didn't know if they'd come down at all.
Nice and easy.
We're going to start milking the flaps down, and we see if we can maintain control of the airplane. Jay is an integral part of this, so he's going to slide the flaps down to like 30 degrees and be watching me and watching everything.
Flaps 30.
I'm going to do a small turn left and right. If I start to lose it, I'll say up and you slam them back up.
You're a test pilot at this particular point in time, and you don't want to be testing on the actual approach because there can be no recovery if you've made the wrong move.
I can land this airplane. Okay, bring the flaps back up to 0. We're gonna go home.
It was a big deal because at that point we thought we could actually land the airplane.
The pilots now know they can slow down the plane enough to get it on the ground. But they need to get it to a runway first.
130 miles to Jeddah. We might be in range now.
Jeddah Whale 05, how copy on Victor?
They attempt to contact the controller for assistance.
Whale 05 Jeddah.
You're loud and clear, go ahead.
Ah, yes sir, this is Whale 05, inbound to Jeddah.
Declaring an emergency. Engines 1 and 2 are out. Whale 05, say souls on board and
fuel remaining.
We have 4 souls on board.
Currently 55,000 pounds
of gas.
Roger. We're preparing the airport for your arrival now.
05, thank you, sir.
With the airport on standby, the crew begins its landing preparations.
Let's look at 2 engines and operative landing.
One of the things that I always loved about Air Force flying was our operations manual covered literally everything. Every procedure that you could possibly think of in an emergency, and including, in this case, the loss of 2 engines on the airplane.
One step will pose a big challenge.
Allow time for manual landing gear extension.
When you lose 2 engines like that, it affects a lot of the hydraulics as well.
We lost the left side hydraulics, which means the gear have to be lowered manually.
Without hydraulic power to lower the landing gear, Stuckey will have to do it manually. It's a complicated task.
It's a real emergency situation, and you have to do each step in the checklist right.
All right, we need to lower by final descent. Can you do it?
Yes, sir. I'll get him down.
It's a procedure he's only done in training.
I'm relying on him to do a stellar job of getting the landing gear down. This is a tight mission.
One more thing.
Sweeney has an important realization.
You gotta pull the anti-skid or we lose our brake pressure. Steve, it should be on the TR bus 2 behind you.
There's only enough hydraulic pressure left to apply the brakes once. Sweeney decides to disengage the anti-skid braking system.
The anti-skid system, which is similar to the automatic braking system on today's modern cars, that don't allow you to lock up the brakes. They'll release, brake, and that's what that anti-skid system is.
Got the anti-skid. Confirmed.
Confirmed.
Disengaging the system will ensure that the remaining hydraulic pressure is used to keep the brakes applied.
If I pull that circuit breaker and just put the brakes on once and hold them, I'm going to have full braking power.
Without the anti-skid, you're going to blow a few tires, but that's not going to take you off the runway, and it is going to be a safe methodology of bringing this airplane back to the surface.
50 miles.
The crew is ready to begin the final approach.
Steve, get into position.
Roger.
The longer they struggle with the controls, the more tired the pilots become.
Jay, it's your turn. I'll take comms.
Okay, I got the airplane.
Your airplane.
Sweeney takes one last break to save his strength for landing.
Jeddah, approach Whale 05.
Whale 05, go ahead, sir.
Jeddah, approach 05.
We have the city in sight. We're gonna fly in south of your field from the east here.
And come into runway 34 left.
No other traffic for the airport at this time.
It's all yours.
All righty, we'll use it and we'll get out of your way shortly.
Sweeney briefs the team on his plan for the approach.
Okay, we're gonna start high and fast, 210 knots. Jay, you start just slowly. Don't drop the flaps unless everything's looking good. Any questions?
No questions.
Okay, Steve, drop the nose gear.
Standing nose gear.
Whale 05 is less than 8 minutes from landing.
Nose gear down and locked.
Roger, showing down.
Seating to right and left main gear.
Throughout the flight, it seemed like we just continually had these dragons come over the hill, and the last one is this landing gear.
Once we put the landing gear down, we're going down. We're committed to land. We don't get a go-around because we're not going to have enough thrust put on 2 engines.
With all 3 landing gear down, the crew of Whale 05 now has no option but to try landing the severely damaged plane.
6 miles, speed 210.
Flaps 20.
Minutes from touching down, all their skill and planning is about to be tested.
I mean, it was very important that each one of us clearly knew what we're going to do. We're going to have one shot at it.
Minimums. Runway in sight.
With 2 engines missing, Whale 05 is about to attempt a landing at King Abdulaziz Airport.
Runway in sight.
It was one of his best approaches probably ever. He was on center line. He was exactly on glide slope.
100 feet.
Coming back to idle. Flaps 50.
Flaps 50. Looking real good. 50. 40. 30. 20.
Reverse thrust interlock.
Major Sweeney begins to deploy the reverse thrust on the inboard right engine to help slow the plane. But it has an unintended outcome.
As soon as he did that, the left wing started to rise.
The powerless left wing is lifting. The right wing could scrape the runway and cause the plane to cartwheel.
Not now, not now.
And I remember thinking, I'm not going to lose it now, and slammed it down.
Without the braking action from full reverse thrust, the plane is quickly running out of runway.
He immediately put it back down, and we relied on the brakes.
Brakes!
Jay was going to put his brakes on too, and we were going to blow a couple tires.
The crew of Whale 05 is safely on the ground.
We did it!
I think we blew 3 or 4 tires before it was over because of the lack of anti-skid, but extraordinary job, really, under the circumstances.
Yeah, in a sense that, oh my God, we managed to get back here and live through this. Who would have thought that?
There was that one moment when you actually stop moving and feel like we've made it. And I think we enjoyed that for maybe a second and then got out of the airplane.
I remember looking back at the wing and, oof, that was just a shock. I mean, they're gone. And there's big holes in the wing and parts hanging out, and wow.
Within a day, the U.S. Air Force launches an investigation. Lieutenant Colonel Ike Stokes is the lead investigator. The fleet of KC-135s is indispensable to the war effort. Did the plane malfunction? Did it come under enemy fire?
There was truly more external pressure than I've experienced in the past, because they're flying 90 to 100 missions out of Jeddah on a daily basis. So it's very critical to the entire operation of the war to really figure out what happened.
Hard to believe both engines are gone.
You're gathering the information, you're analyzing the information. It was just a wonderment to see something like this.
Stokes checks for scorch marks and residue from explosives.
One thing investigators always consider, was this intentional? Did someone shoot at the plane?
If this was an enemy missile, it could mean the threat from Iraq is escalating, putting the entire refueling fleet and the outcome of the war at risk.
Let's face it, we're fighting a war. We have a critical asset. These are combat air refueling missions, so if the fighters and bombers do not get the fuel, they can't complete the mission.
But evidence of enemy fire is not what Stokes finds.
There's no scorch marks or explosive residue. There's no evidence of an enemy attack. These engines were ripped right off.
Stokes wonders what kind of force tore off the plane's left engines.
One of the things that we really wanted to do was to find the engines. But at the time, we had no idea as to where to exactly look.
We're gonna need those missing engines.
Although the navigator did record where the mishap occurred, those engines could be spread over quite an area of desert.
Fortunately, a group of Bedouins discovered the engines and reported the find.
They said, "What do you want us to do with them?" And we immediately said, "Get a truck, flatbed, and a crane and go out to the desert and let's get the engines recovered."
Accident investigation can do incredible things by piecing together from very small bits of evidence what happened, but it is so much easier when you can actually go out and get these things, and thank goodness they were able to find them in the desert.
Nice work.
A big thing that helped us out in the investigation was getting the engines back to the location.
Stokes notices something unusual.
They find it like this?
One of the thrust reversers is partially deployed.
Of course, we need to explain or understand why that was open.
Thrust reversers change the direction of exhaust air flowing from the back of the engine to slow the plane down.
The idea that the thrust reverser could come open in flight at cruise speed of over 80% of the speed of sound is a very important consideration, because that could create an upset situation.
Did the thrust reverser deploy mid-flight and cause the engines to rip off the plane?
This control cable snapped.
But in looking at it, you could see how the cables that operated the thrust reverser ripped out as the engine was departing from the airplane.
There's nothing wrong with the engines.
Deployment of the thrust reversers didn't rip the engines off the plane.
See what the crew has to say.
Investigator Ike Stokes wonders if the crew can shed some light on why a KC-135 lost 2 engines mid-flight.
Okay. So tell me what happened when the event started?
Knowing in this case that we had a crew that survived the mishap, it was invaluable, because you really do need the initial inputs of what those crew members experienced to put the whole story together.
Well, the yoke moved for a second, then it corrected itself. And then out of nowhere, it cranked itself left.
At what point in the flight was this?
Oh, shortly after reaching cruising altitude. And another KC-135 passed us.
Wait, so another plane was passing you?
It was on the same flight path, but it had further to go, so we let it pass through. It felt like we hit heavy turbulence.
It's a significant clue.
How far away was the other aircraft when it passed your plane?
Oh, I'd say a quarter of a mile, half a mile to the left of us.
Heavy aircraft leave powerful wake turbulence behind them when they fly. Stokes wonders if Sweeney's plane was close enough to get caught in the other KC-135's wake.
We're talking about very strong circular wind coming off of this airplane wing, and it can cause the upset of another airplane, regardless of its size, if it hits it just right.
And how far away was the other plane when the turbulence started?
Well, they were at least 2 miles ahead of us.
If this was indeed wake turbulence, investigators wonder why only the left engines were affected.
Thank you, Major.
Thank you, sir.
An examination of the right engines might help to reveal what happened.
Right engine bolts?
Each KC-135 engine is attached to the wing with 3 large bolts.
These 4 are completely severed.
Stokes discovers that 2 bolts on each right engine were sheared in half.
How did those engines stay attached?
They were 1 bolt away from actually losing the engines off of the right wing, which would have made them nothing more than a high-speed glider.
With wake turbulence looking more and more a likely cause.
The Whale 05 is at 25,000 feet.
Investigators compile the critical data needed to calculate the forces that Whale 05 may have passed through.
Whale 20 is at 25,500 feet. That's everything.
But they need help from the plane's manufacturer to analyze the data.
Let's talk to Boeing.
Understanding how the 2 airplanes affected their separation gave us the data necessary to talk with the engineers at Boeing.
Wow, the left wing G-forces were 2.88.
That exceeded the structural capability of the pylons, and so they separated from the airplane.
And the right wing, 2.61. Let's see what that looks like.
The extreme lateral G-forces on the left side of the plane were enough to tear the left engines off, but not quite strong enough to rip them off the right side.
0.14 more Gs on the right side. This plane would have been nothing more but a massive glider.
They were very, very close to coming off. The G-force loading was just not enough to sling them off of the airplane.
It was said that we had 1 more gyration, and we might have been a high-speed heavyweight glider, but we made it.
This leaves investigators with one burning question.
And these guys train for lead changes. Why did this mission go sideways?
U.S. Air Force investigator Ike Stokes tries to understand how wake turbulence nearly destroyed a gigantic tanker aircraft.
Separation between the 2 planes is by the book. That's it. Wind was 85 knots from the west.
The wind was blowing enough at altitude to push the wingtip vortices from the preceding airplane into the flight path of the mishap aircraft.
I mean, they accounted for everything. They were foiled by the direction of the wind. Perfect storm.
But Stokes still doesn't know how this perfect storm ever got a chance to form.
When you're taking off between 90 to 100 airplanes on a daily basis, the arrival and departure from the base is very critical. And in this particular case, the mishap aircraft was parked in such a way that it had to go first and be followed by the second airplane, the one that had further to go.
The solution that they came up with was a perfectly responsible solution, and that was, we're going to take off individually, and then you're going to pass me.
Had the number 2 plane been parked to the left of the mishap airplane, the mishap never would have occurred.
investigators finally understand what happened to Whale 05.
05's level.
On a wartime mission over the Saudi Arabian desert, 2 KC-135s switch position mid-flight.
Altitude hold. On. Altitude hold check.
The wake turbulence generated by the passing plane is blown into the path of Whale 05. It creates a tremendous force that flips the plane so violently, G-forces rip both engines off the left wing.
I've often heard flying described as hours and hours of sheer boredom, followed by moments of stark raving terror. In this case, the crew experienced that stark raving terror.
None of them too much dread.
The oscillations almost push the right engines and the aircraft beyond the point of recovery.
Speed brake.
But with the quick thinking of a seasoned wartime commander, the plane levels off.
Coming back to level flight was a true feat of airmanship.
Greg, are your nav instruments working?
Yes, INS is functional, radar is still up.
Well, give me a heading back to Jeddah.
The coordination of a well-trained crew
Nose gear down and locked.
Runway in sight.
brings Whale 05 back home safely.
Aircraft commander was an excellent airman. But the fact is, he had every brain in that airplane working in tandem with him, side by side, to make sure they didn't miss anything.
I was very fortunate to fly one of the best crews in the Air Force, in my humble opinion. They did their job in a critical situation, and it wasn't just me getting back to the airplane, it was the team got back to the airplane.
We did it.
Whether it's a refueling plane in wartime or a routine domestic flight in a 747, the importance of teamwork can never be overstated.
Why this crew succeeded is because they were thoroughly imbued with the idea that they had to talk to each other seamlessly, and all of them put their minds to the task of what are the proper procedures, what are we facing, what do we need to do, and that, I think, is still one of the many lessons that comes out of this.
Kevin and I have gone through this numerous times over barbecue and beer and tried to figure out, is there anything we could have done better? Are there steps that we missed? And we're pretty satisfied that as a crew, we took the actions that needed to be taken when they needed to be taken and probably wouldn't change a thing.
The crew's handling of the crisis earned them each the Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism or extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight.
It's like a Purple Heart almost. You don't want it because you're in a situation you probably don't want to be in, but we're very thankful, very happy with that.
The Air Force trains you that every day is not going to be a perfect day. There's going to be a day that you're going to get in the bucket. And when that day comes, if you've done your homework, you'll be good enough to make it. And I think the Air Force does an outstanding job of this.
Amazingly, the same KC-135 went on to fly for another 13 years.
I do remember seeing the airplane sitting over by itself, thinking, you know, that'll never fly again. And as it turns out, Boeing came out, put a laser on it, and said it was still straight, it hadn't been bent. It was repaired, flown back from Jeddah, and flew a number of missions, and it soldiered on for quite a while.